Millions of people in Cuba were without power on Friday after the island's largest and most efficient power plant failed, the energy minister said. Earlier in the day, the government had shut down schools and non-essential industry and sent most state workers home in a bid to keep the lights on. President Miguel Diaz-Canel said on X that, quote, there will be no rest until power is restored. Grid officials said they did not know how long it would take. The outage comes as residents are already struggling with shortages of food, fuel, water, and medicine. This resident says the situation looks bleak.
Muy fuerte, muy fuerte.
It's too hard. Too hard. This is in decline, and there are more and more blackouts. This is on the verge of total collapse.
While demand for electricity grows, fuel supply has all but dried up on an island that produces comparatively little of its own. Prime Minister Manuel Marrero spoke on national TV on Thursday. He said the blackouts were due to the situation well known to most Cubans: deteriorating infrastructure, fuel shortages, and rising demand. Dangerous weather conditions that began with Hurricane Milton last week crippled the country's ability to deliver fuel to power plants from boats offshore, officials said. The government has also long blamed the U.S. Cold War-era embargo and sanctions under former President Donald Trump for difficulties in acquiring fuel and spare parts to operate its oil-fired plants. Cuba's largest oil supplier, Venezuela, has also reduced shipments in the first 9 months of the year, according to vessel monitoring data and internal shipping documents. Russia and Mexico have also greatly reduced fuel shipments to the island. Earlier on Friday, Cuban electricity officials said they expect power generation to improve in the coming days, as the weather allows fuel from prior deliveries to be distributed around the island.
Cuba plunged into a countrywide blackout after the collapse of one of its major power plants Friday. By evening, officials said a trickle of power to its grid was restored. Grid operator UNE said it hoped to restart at least 5 of its oil-fired generation plants overnight, so it can gradually restore power to broader areas of the country. The vast majority of the country's 10 million residents were still in the dark on Friday night. Scattered pockets of the capital, Havana, including some of the city's major hospitals, saw lights flicker back on shortly after dark. Residents lit candles and fires and got through their Friday evening. A local, Rafael Pedro Gomez, says small children, the elderly, and the sick were suffering the most from the outage. And an employee of a hostel, Claudia Amanda Betancourt, says without electricity, guests in the room don't have air conditioning. Virtually all businesses in Havana ground to a halt on Friday. Earlier, the government was forced to close schools. Most state workers were sent home in a last-ditch effort to keep the lights on after weeks of severe power outages. Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel on TV told people to remain united and urged caution to residents from misinformation on social media. The blackout comes as residents are also suffering from shortages of food, fuel, water, and medicine. Officials blamed the outage on deteriorating infrastructure, fuel shortages, and rising demand. They also said strong winds from Hurricane Milton last week hampered fuel deliveries to power plants. Cuba has long blamed U.S. Cold War-era embargo and sanctions under former President Donald Trump for difficulties in acquiring fuel and spare parts to operate its oil-fired plants. The country's largest oil supplier, Venezuela, has also reduced shipments in the first 9 months of the year, while Russia and Mexico have also greatly reduced fuel shipments to the island.